And the South Sudan People's Liberation Movement, in opposition under the leadership of the first Vice President Taban and IGAD, has said it will not accept to be consulted separately by IGAD, a high-level revitalization forum, because they are part of the transitional government of national unity. And to discuss this issue with me is an African affairs analyst, Mawan Muortat. He's joining me via Skype from London. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
What do you think are the implications of this SPLMIO refusing to be part of this peace process, of course, that has been set in place since 2015?
No, it's not surprising. What is surprising is, and it's refreshing and welcome news, is the revitalization or attempt to revitalize the peace process from the side of the IGAD group. So it's quite good news that they've decided to approach all the parties again in order to revitalize the peace agreement. It's not surprising at all that that Taban and IGAD is refusing to be consulted independently because we know that in 2016, when war broke out again in Juba after Riek Machar, the leader of the SPLM-IO, had returned, Riek Machar left Juba, but his deputies, including Taban and IGAD, decided to stay in Juba and to continue the peace agreement that had been signed before. And that led to him being appointed as the new vice president in place of Riek Machar. So he considers himself to be part of the transitional government. That's absolutely correct. Although it's not, it could be understood why the IGAD is trying to approach people individually. That's probably a desperate situation or a desperate attempt to try and maybe revitalize the agreement to see whether they could reach something. But from the point of view of the vice president, Taban and IGAD, it's quite clear why he would not want to be consulted independently. There are only two parties to the peace agreement, which is the government, transitional government, headed by Salva Kiir and deputized by Taban and IGAD, and the opposition movement headed by Riek Machar.
Well, Johnson Oloni, the rebel commander, is accusing IGAD of using divide and rule tactics, which is in favor of the government. What's your take on this view from Johnson Oloni?
Yes, obviously, I mean, South Sudan is a country that's facing a lot of security issues. There isn't only one armed opposition. We were just talking about the SPLM in opposition, headed by Riek Machar. But also there are other groups, including the group headed by Johnson Oloni, and so many others. So that's a general comment from his part. I suppose is designed to signal to the mediators that he himself and other groups should also be included in the talks, not just the government and the SPLM in opposition.
Would you recommend a sort of change in strategy on the part of IGAD so that it can get everybody on board in terms of this peace process that seems to defy all solutions?
Yes, I mean, I think this is an attempt to change their approach to the talks, and it doesn't seem to be working. So maybe they have to think again. This idea of approaching people individually, even within the government, I think is quite difficult to implement. I think it's going to be strongly resisted. I think it's very, very important for them to consider the government as one bloc and then approach all the different opposition groups and see whether they would want to talk to the government as on one single platform or maybe on a bilateral basis. But it's obviously something for the IGAD mediators and other international outside mediators are concerned to decide.
So what do you think it would take really in practical terms to achieve a permanent ceasefire, which is the goal at the end of the day?
It is very, very difficult because all parties, including the opposition, are bent on achieving a total military victory. Until that mental set is changed by all the parties concerned, there will be no peace agreement in South Sudan. But as far as the peace goes, we are not facing the same military confrontation that we saw in 2014 and 2015, or even 2016. Things have tilted quite significantly in favor of the government. However, the government of South Sudan faces many other problems, and more importantly is the question of the refugees, whereby, as we speak, more than 2 million South Sudanese have been displaced outside the country, and another 2 million displaced within the country. So that's obviously the biggest headache and the biggest problem for the government to address. No government can exist without looking after its people. So this is the biggest challenge for the government of South Sudan, way beyond the issue of just defending the government or defending the state against the rebellion. Another thing is obviously the state of the economy. South Sudan heavily depends on oil exports, and oil prices have plummeted significantly. And also the war has exhausted whatever reserves are present. So the situation is quite dire, and the government is failing even to bankroll its own costs and pay its employees. So that's the next headache. The ominous risk of total economic collapse, plus the issue of the refugees, and then the issue of insecurity, of course, that is continuing, albeit, as I said,
all right,
not as great as before.
Right, Mawan Muortat, African Affairs Analyst, joining me via Skype from London. Thank you so much for your insight, of course, and your time. Really dire situation there in South Sudan.